Hey y'all, welcome to Pleiadian Point of View. I'm Peyton with Peyton Energetics, and as you can imagine, I'm a Pleiadian channel. So in this week's Point of View, the Pleiadians wanted to talk to us about what they call the benevolence scale. And that is the range of benevolence that we have in our galactic family. Now, in the spiritual community, we are pretty familiar with most of the benevolent races. So we hear a lot, of course, from the Pleiadians, who we love, but we know a lot about the more benevolent races. The Sirians, the Arcturians, the Andromedans, we're pretty familiar with them, right? And we hear a lot about them. But we also talk quite a bit in the spiritual community about some of the races that we don't consider to be quite so friendly. And there is a science to this, according to the Pleiadians, and a way for us to understand where the various races fall in terms of what we would consider to be benevolence. So the guides like to talk about the star races in two general categories. The first category is what we on Earth may consider to be those races that are benevolent. But as the Pleiadians like to say, a better way to look at this is that these races are what we would call service to others. And on the other end of the scale, we have those races that we are not generally quite as focused on in the spiritual community. Those races that we know are not quite as helpful to us here on Earth. And sometimes we call these races those that are service to self. Now, in each of these two general categories, we have a whole range of races. And as the Pleiadians like to remind us, no star race is any one thing. So not all Pleiadians are love and light, although most of them are. And on the other hand, not all reptilians are what we would consider to be malevolent, although many of them are. So the guides like to use what they call the benevolence scale to help humanity make sense of our galactic family. Because as we start to move deeper into the window for open contact, it's important for us to do so with our eyes open, because we don't want to be falling for any more of the manipulation and deception that has kind of been the norm here on Earth. So the guides wanted to talk to us a little bit about this scale so that we can go into our open contact with our eyes open. Because just as we have humans who are lovely and wonderful and kind, and we have plenty of people who are just the opposite, our galactic family is no different. So we want to be just aware of the spectrum that is out there so that we can decide who has access to us. Because as the Pleiadians like to say, you are in charge of who has access to you. But we need to be aware of what is out there so that we can make the best decisions. So let's start off by talking about what the guides consider to be those races that we would consider to be primarily service to others. And a lot of times we will call these the benevolent races. And a lot of times we will put the Arcturians in this category, the Pleiadians in this category, the Andromedans in this category, the Assassani in this category, and most, but not all, of the Sirians. So these, of course, are the races that we are most familiar with in the spiritual community. They are the ones that are helping Earth most openly, who are guiding us, channeling through us, and supporting us through the ascension process. But there is one thing that's important to know about the benevolent races, something that seems a little bit counterintuitive to our human minds, and that is that the more a race falls on what we would call the extreme end of benevolence, because as the Pleiadians describe, benevolence is a scale. It's not black or white. So when we are talking about those that we would put on the most extreme end of being service to others, an interesting thing happens. According to the Pleiadians, the more extreme a race is in terms of being service to others, the less that race will be willing to interfere or intervene with other civilizations. So our human mind might think that the more benevolent a race is, the more it's going to help out a civilization that is struggling, or a civilization like us here on Earth that has been enslaved and abused for as long as we have here on Earth. But according to the guides, not so. The more extreme a race is in terms of its positioning on the benevolent scale, the less likely it is to do anything that would be considered interference. Because we have talked in a couple videos about the non-interference protocols in the galaxy and how seriously our star family, at least the benevolent members, take those protocols. And so the most benevolent races are not going to do anything to violate those protocols, to interfere with another civilization, even if that means doing nothing when that civilization is about to destroy itself. And so that's something that can be kind of confusing to the human mind. We would think that the more benevolent a race is, the more they're going to be willing to step up to intervene if a civilization is being abused. But that's not the case. The more benevolent a race is, the less likely they are to help out, to interfere, because they are going to value the sovereignty and the free will of every other being, even the free will to destroy yourself. So with some of our most benevolent races, we are going to see that they are least likely to step in, to intervene, even if something kind of nasty is going on. So that is something kind of interesting. It caught me by surprise when the Pleiadians first started explaining this to me, but it makes a lot of sense. So when you think of some of our most benevolent star races, they are also the ones that are most cautious with what they are sharing with us right now. And you can see this with some of the star races like the Arcturians, the Essassani. They are very, very careful about the no contact provisions. They don't want to do anything to intervene, to interfere with our ability to create our own future. And this is why that is. So the Pleiadians wanted to explain that because it's something that can take a minute for our human minds to wrap around, that the most hands-off races are often the most benevolent. Those are the ones who are going to be most respectful of the independence and free will of all other beings. Now, let's jump and talk about the other category of races that we have out there. And these are the ones that we consider to be service to self. Now, this category covers a lot of ground. We have many races who are very loving and benevolent that can fall into this category for reasons I will explain in a moment. But in this category, we also have those beings that we would consider to be negatively oriented. And at the most extreme end, because as the guides like to say, this is a scale, not black and white. At the most extreme end, we often place the ancient reptilians, the draconians, and also some of the negatively oriented grays. So these are some examples of races that we would consider to be the most negatively oriented. But we also have races that fall kind of in the middle of the scale. Now, when we talk about these races that we would all consider to be very negatively oriented, there's also an interesting thing about them. With these races, these beings can be very, very loving to their own kind and to those other races that they respect, but they may have absolutely zero consideration for any other being. And this is what we see in many of the reptilian species, that they may be very loving and respectful of their own kind, but have no consideration or respect for other species. So this is something that is a characteristic of the races that we call service to self. Now, there's also an interesting thing that happens in the middle of this scale. So there are some races that kind of fall in the mid-ground between being extremely service to self and extremely service to others. And what gets interesting about the benevolent scale is that we can have many highly loving and benevolent races that fall kind of in the middle. And so it makes you wonder, what is going on with that? How could a loving, benevolent race that is very much service to others fall in the middle of the scale, or even tip over slightly into being service to self? And what happens here, according to the guides, is that there are a number of races that, while they are very loving and benevolent and very much committed to service to others, they are willing to step in and help other civilizations that are being abused, that are being enslaved, that are being mistreated. There are a number of races who look at what is going on in the galaxy, and especially with what is going on here on Earth, and think that it is not appropriate to stand back and do nothing when another race is being mistreated. So because of this, we have certain members of our star family who are willing to be more flexible on the no contact provisions. So they are willing to say that it is appropriate under the no contact rules to step in and help a civilization, especially a struggling new civilization like we are here on Earth, still evolving, if that race is being abused and violated by other species, which of course is what we have going on here on Earth, the enslavement game. So we have several members of our galactic family who think that it's inappropriate for them to sit back and do nothing in the face of abuse when another race is being enslaved. And because of that, we have a few members of our galactic family who are willing to help out more. We do have several races who are willing to share information that other races refuse to do. So we have some races who are pushing the envelope. And again, it is not out of any lack of benevolence or lack of respect for humans' free will, but they are seeing that a race has been so thoroughly abused that some of these races are looking at the situation on Earth and saying that they don't see how humans can right the ship if we don't know we are being lied to and manipulated in every direction. So they think it is appropriate to provide extra support, extra assistance. And again, this isn't something they would do with your average new civilization. They would respect the no contact protocols, but Earth is considered by certain races to be a special circumstance because of the extent of the abuse that has happened to humanity. So we have certain races who are more aggressive in being willing to contact us, in being more willing to share information that is hard to come by from some of the more conservative star races. And these are the races that take the position that if they sit back and do nothing to help Earth, they are letting abuse be perpetuated on their watch, and they're not okay with that. So, and oftentimes we will put the fifth density Pleiadians in this category of being willing to push the envelope in the interest of helping an abused civilization just get its feet under it. So because of this, it is viewed in the galactic community as a flexibility in the no contact provisions. And some of the more traditional, more conservative races would not step in this situation. But others think that this is a valid exception to the no contact rule. And so they're willing to help Earth more. They are willing to share more information than some of the other star races are willing to share. And so because of this, this nudges them into the middle of the scale, because more conservative races would say they are sharing information prematurely. But it is justified according to some members of our galactic family. And thank goodness for that, because these are some of the races who are most actively championing us, who are protecting our airspace from the negatives, who are contacting us and sharing information and technology that other members of our star family aren't willing to. But it does nudge them into kind of the middle of the scale, because some members of the star family view this as interference. But many star races are starting to say enough is enough. Earth needs a chance to see what has been done to it if we are going to make a valid choice of how we move forward. So thankfully, we have some members of our star family who are a little more flexible, and these are some of the ones sharing some of the most helpful information with humanity right now. So the Pleiadians wanted you to understand this spectrum of benevolence and where some of the races fall on it, and some of the things you might not expect when you first hear about the benevolent races and those that are less benevolent. So I hope this has helped you. I will see you soon. Bye.